I can't even hear the music.
Welcome back,
Ugh.
Tac Visor OverWatch League podcast. This is week 21. I'm pretty sure,
That
although
was a horrendous noise.
it's all been a blur. School's awesome. Go to college, kids. Week 21 of the Overwatch League. We got started off on Saturday, June 27th, bright and early in the morning, with the Charge versus the Hunters. This is exactly how I thought it was going to go. I'm not surprised that the Hunters took one map. They seem to be good for one or two maps. Unfortunately, they just can't seem to pull off a full match win. Why is that?
I'm more wondering why you didn't actually introduce us in case we have new
Sorry,
viewers, more so than what happened
you
with the
you
match. In
introduced
case you
us.
didn't know,
College is
I'm
great, kids.
Skitch, co-host of the Tac Visor podcast, and the other one who did the introduction and messed it up is Senile King. So that introductions are out of the way. Now we can answer the more important
Well,
question.
co-host, producer, sound mixer,
He's
technician.
trying to lay it on.
I,
Trying to lay it on.
if we're gonna
See, he
label,
does.
give me labels.
He brings the work. I bring the talent.
Okay.
But I really don't. I don't think it's so much a problem with the Hunters. Getting to watch the Charge this weekend, it's pretty clear that they're going to be one of those teams vying for the final spot representing the Asian region.
Sure.
I think a big part of it is because we finally early on in the season, Eileen and Happy weren't really working too well as a DPS duo. Their positioning was not complementing their tank play very well. Especially Happy, he would be really hyper aggressive on his hit scan, which you want in your hit scan. But when you're overextending and you're not able to cover the flank to keep your tanks protected or even support your back line, it can cause a problem and it puts a lot more pressure on your counterpart. And Eileen just couldn't do it on his own. That's why we saw a lot more Nero. But now that I think that they finally shored that up, they finally have the lineup that I think best suits their style of play, especially now that there's no hero pool and they can play their double shield every weekend, which is their bread and butter.
Yeah, I think so too. Watching the slow and at some points painful evolution of Happy and Eileen kind of finding their own identities has finally, I think, come to fruition over the last 2 weeks. They've played very, very well together, and it's not even a knock against the Hunters. I think the Hunters have unfortunately played very good competition almost every match. They've had a very tough schedule. They seem to be hanging in. I think that they should keep their heads up, even taking one map, 1 point against the Charge. The Charge have just been playing that good. I think it's definitely made it a lot easier on them with the emergence of Krong playing as well as he has, and allowing them to play a little bit more aggressively without the immediate threat of death, at least. So I believe that I think we both called that 3-1. I'll have to go back and get the exact numbers, but I think we both called that 3-1. So I wasn't surprised to see that at all.
No, and credit to the Hunters for they finally, I think, figured out a comp that works well for them.
Mm-hmm.
And while it was a 3-1 match, they were a lot more competitive, and we've been seeing better competition from them now that they've solved the problem of not having a comp that they'll run with. Now we just got to figure out if they're going to be running A-Ting or aiming moving forward. So
Yeah, and that's a tough call, and I think it depends on really if you're looking at playing a more dive comp, with aiming on ball, or if you want to play it that way. That's kind of been how they've been leaning, but it'll be interesting when you're playing against a team like the Charge that can kind of do both, but they prefer the one shield off tank style of play. I think they held their own pretty. I say as well as they could have. I don't think anyone thought they were going to win. So stealing a map they should be happy about that.
yeah, and the same thing goes for our next with the Soul Dynasty against the Dragons. I mean, the Dynasty, it's kind of one of those weird things. They look very good. They honestly do. It's just Shanghai is absolutely unbelievable. We talk about it every week. And, we've seen this match already this season be, lopsided. We then saw it get competitive for a good stretch. And now it's kind of in that in between in a way.
Yeah.
And I really don't even know what else to say other than it's really just Shanghai is to me, far and away the best team in the Asian region and the favorite to come out of that division.
Yeah, and I would agree. I don't know who else would be really contending with them right now. Um, even the Charge aren't quite up to the same snuff that Shanghai is, even just having praised them. I expected a little bit more from the Dynasty. I think it's weird that they took one map. They tend to either, win or play pretty dominantly, or they kind of get rolled over. So I do like that they at least took one map and against Shanghai. I think it's good for them moving forward. I guess the less volatile they continue to be, I think the more consistent we'll start to see them play. And I'm hoping that this is kind of the start. I don't think there was much they were going to be able to do against Shanghai. I think they're 3-0. I don't want to call it a fluke, but I don't think that it'll happen again in the season.
So I wouldn't say it's a fluke
Yeah.
because I'd say this was the one thing about the weekend that it maybe lends itself to them not being as volatile as you look at them and say that they are. I think the Dynasty this weekend we saw Prophet get switched on a couple of different heroes. We saw obviously the Tracer. We saw him on Echo. We even saw him on Torbjorn a couple times here and there. We started to see them kind of tinker with what their DPS. Yeah, hammer away, man.
Yeah.
We've seen them kind of cycle their DPS characters. They're sticking with Fitz a little bit more now. They made a mistake moving off of him last week.
I thought so too.
But they finally got him back in with Prophet, and they're rotating their DPS heroes. And to get a map while you're kind of tinkering with your meta as a team, I'd say that speaks volumes, especially when your production is coming from your best players, which in their case are the former Spitfire trio in Gesture, Bedosin, who Dosin has unfortunately, because they haven't won as many matches as they probably should. Bedosin's play has been very underappreciated, I think. Yeah. Like he's returned to his season 1 form in a lot of ways, and it's been very nice to see. But I think that going forward, if the Dynasty can kind of figure out a couple metas that can help them, I think that they'll be right up there contending to try and be the team that goes against Shanghai in the end for that final spot, alongside teams like MYXL, the Charge, and depending on how they look, the Spark, which what happened?
I know. Yeah, and that's our next match that I know you're segueing into. I mean, this is not a very solid Spitfire team. I mean, they're a middle of the pack as middle of the pack comes. We've been very high and talked to very high on the Spark the last couple weeks, and I think that they've played excellent. It just seemed like the Spitfire kind of took over early, and then they just never kind of stopped. I don't know. It never felt like the Spark were putting themselves in a position to win team fights. They would get a pick first, and then they would still lose the team fight, which, I mean, you're just giving them away. When normally the work is done. When it's a 5-on-6, that's when your DPS can kind of go to town, especially if it's another healer that's been taken down. Your healers, all of a sudden, your Baptiste can start shooting a little more instead of healing. I mean, more damage comes out. And they were still losing those fights. So it seemed a little off brand for them. I'm not sure what happened. I didn't think they looked like they were trying to experiment too much. I just think they were caught a little bit off guard by what the Spitfire were trying to do, and they couldn't recover from it.
No, I do think there was a little bit of experimentation.
A little.
Because
I mean, not as much for a 3-0.
No, it was more like I think most of the experimentation honestly lied just with Architect, and then they kept rotating out Godsby for their bench DPS. So there was experimentation there, which that seems to already be a trend that we've kind of covered this week. There was a lot of DPS tinkering this weekend, which was the most interesting one I want to get to later, which is also the most baffling of the close matches to me. We'll get to that in a little bit. But for me, what I honestly thought it was, the more I watched back on it, it honestly looked to me like the Spark were just kind of, and I hate to say this, it looked like they didn't take this match seriously or just simply didn't care.
Right.
I think they were looking ahead to the fact that they were playing Shanghai the next day.
Sure.
And I think that bit them in the butt because Spitfire,
twice.
The thing about them is they don't Spitfire is just a middle of the pack team, I would say, especially based on roster. They're not going to take any match off because they're trying to prove themselves and they're trying to get better within their matches, which most teams should try to do. But you see a lot of them, they try to do that in practice and then just come out and roll.
Yep.
But the Spitfire, they give them credit. They came out and they approached this just like they have every other match. We've seen them take maps off of the better teams in the league. And, they did a really good job to me, aside from actually taking the match seriously where the Spark didn't. They did an excellent job taking QOQ out of the equation. Like, we saw the impact it would have every time he got picked first or even second in team fights. The Spark would just fall apart. And which is a good thing for us because we were already high on him after 1 week, just his second weekend. You still see the value that he has. And so he is, all he's cracked up to be, I think. It's just this match was one where the Spitfire were like, we're taking you out. We're not losing because of you. Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed I was pretty happy with how London had played. They were definitely this is not a phrase even remotely. I'm definitely making this up, but they were out talented. The talent on the Spark, I think, is much higher than London.
For sure.
But London just kind of rallied together, and I like I said, I agree. I don't think that the Spark were ready for this. I think that they were definitely looking ahead, and it bit them twice. It bit them twice this weekend.
Yeah. Now, this was the match that you were messaging me about with a lot of excitement after you finally got to go back and rewatch it.
Yes.
So I'll lead off this one. We had the Mayhem Outlaws, your former team against a team that you're a huge fan of their colors.
Yes.
And their merch. So, take it away. I want to hear this.
So I did get to go back and watch this, and I will just reiterate once again, especially if you are just joining us. Dante would be MVP if he was on any other team. Look me in the eye. Any other team. Okay, now that that's out of the way. He played like a possible MVP candidate had he not been on this awful team.
Hold on.
I shouldn't say awful team. They're not awful. And
they're no
played
longer awful.
Much better over the last couple of weeks.
They have definitely looked like a middle of the year. Yes, they went from bottom to right there in the middle. Yep. That is a huge improvement.
I completely agree.
Especially when you think about, to get there, they used a DPS as a tank.
Yes. And, well, he's a tank. And it's very, very apparent, his DPS roots with how much damage he's putting out. I mean, he had 107 eliminations throughout this match. 107. I mean, that's a lot. And so you're going from that. He did 33,000, damage and all that, and he playing as these Orissas and things like that. This match was so close. Obviously, in the scoreboard, we see 3-2. I think there were two of the maps were not won by 1 point. It was very, very, very close. So close that the damage output between the two teams was within 2% of each other. 2%. 6,800 damage separated the two teams. That sounds like a lot, and it's not. The Mayhem alone put out 264,000 damage by themselves. That is insane. That is so much damage. And Houston was, with their DPS, Dante was able to match Yaki as far as production, and we know what Yaki can do. Dante actually
elimination production.
He out-eliminated him, and it wasn't that far off in damage either. Now, BQB kind of took over in the damage realm on the Mayhem side. He definitely out-damaged all the other DPS on the field. He was definitely lighting it up. But if Dante had that Robin to his Batman like BQB and Yaki do, and they're almost both Batman. Some matches, one of them is Robin, one of them is Batman, and then sometimes it flips throughout the match.
Not even some matches, some maps.
Yeah. Like, BQB sometimes just takes over, and then Yaki's like, well, you take a breather. I got this quad kill. Like, we're good.
I got Gotham tonight. It's cool.
Right. But with Houston, Dante has to produce, and 54,000 damage is a ton. But when the next closest person to you is 10,000 less than that, and I know they were subbing in and out with a couple different DPS, and that's perfectly fine. I didn't like seeing him on Echo. I believe that's one of the reasons why they lost that second map. I don't think the Echo is a good choice for him. We obviously see him most on hit scan DPS, especially the Tracer. So I would much rather see him sticking with those instead of being put on the Echo. But that's, I think, a coaching decision and not necessarily, they were maybe just trying to play the meta or play completely against whatever Mayhem were doing. I think this is a very, very exciting loss for the Outlaws to go up against one of the, I would say, one of the top 3 teams in the league, and just barely not take home the win. I think they could have won one of those early maps. They kind of got off the point, and the clock expired. They had 2 picks, and they ended up losing the fight. Just an inkling more. Now, I will say too, they didn't have quite the healing output that the Mayhem did. So if we take that 6,800 damage, and then we also add in that they were at almost exactly 10,000 healing less than the Mayhem. Now, that's still only 7% difference, but 157,000 healing coming from the Mayhem to 147,000 coming from Houston. That 10,000 is a lot of deaths. That's a lot of deaths, especially when you're just talking about your DPS and your squishies. It's only 200 health, so that's a lot of deaths that you're giving up. So I think that's where they kind of were lacking, was just in the healing output.
I was gonna let you I let you lead that, and I was like, man, he might talk about this the entire time. Yeah. I might not gonna say anything.
Yeah. Nope, it's all you, man. Take it over.
Because the only things, don't forget the Echo pick was actually on the very first map.
It was on the first map
on Oasis.
Yes.
The second map, Dante was Tracer, but I don't think it matters what Dante was going to play on the second map, because Yaki was like, Volskaya is my map.
Yeah.
That man went out, and within the second, halfway through the second set of overtime, had already set the solo elimination record on Volskaya on his own.
Yeah.
He was at 24, and there was still another attack and a half to go.
Yeah, ton of time. What do you end up with, 30?
He ended up with over 30. I'd have 33? To go back and double check. I think it was 33 or 34. Yeah, I think it
was 33.
I know when they first ended the match, they said 32, but then they went back and recalculated and said that there were 2 that he actually got credit for that they didn't catch on the final stat sheet at the end of the game. But I've kind of started to pull for the Mayhem a lot more than most other teams in North America, because I like their style. They play this, you don't really see it that much, because usually teams like to dedicate themselves to one of 2 styles of play: slow and steady or full on dive. You rarely see, like we did in season 1 and halfway through season 2 when we saw the Rolock get introduced, these hybrids of some dive, some slow and steady. Basically what I would call a standard comp, which is where you mix up styles so that you can keep the opponent off balance, especially if they are dedicated to one style of play.
Like the charge.
And I think that the Mayhem running with, they use McCree, they use Genji, and when you're going up against, even if you have a counterpart Genji, when you have an Echo or a Pharah, someone like that who's that aerial splash damage or focus damage type of hero, and you put a McCree in there, perfect counter. Then it's just basically Genji v Genji. And the McCree is honestly, when you get down to it, a perfect counter for a Genji with the flashbang and the quick headshot ability. So you have 2 negatings, because I don't think Blase is anywhere near the top 15 or 20 Genjis in the lead. And that's not to be a backhand against him, but when you're talking about guys like Yaki, you're talking about guys like Hoxel, you're talking about even Dante, when he wants to, can play a pretty good Genji. There are support players better than Blase on Genji. Shoot, just throw out Jonak, for crying out loud. We've seen that man play on Genji. But Dosen's good on Genji. I could go on. But when you have players who excel at these heroes and then you pair them together in these unorthodox ways, it tends to lend itself to your advantage, because the other team is going to be dedicated to their style. And that's what we saw from Houston. They wanted to run with their double shield, high damage output, slow and steady, grind away the fights. And when you're trying to grind away to fight, and then all of a sudden Genji's in your back line and he's got both your supports eliminated before you can even turn around, because that's what Yaki brings. He brings that quick team fight turn ability. It's not the kind of thing, no matter how good you're getting and no matter what players you have on your team, that you can account for. And for me, even though it ended up being 3-2, I feel like this match has kind of helped. Yes, it's a good loss for the Outlaws because it's against one of the better teams in
Quality loss.
at least in the American region. We don't know what they look like against the Asian. That's a whole other discussion for another day. My biggest takeaway is BQB is just as viable, like you said, as Yaki. He is easily can be Batman any day of the week on their team. But for me, I said it the other day, not even as a flanking DPS, just as a DPS hero, period. Yaki is easily in that top 5 discussion now with the way that he has asserted himself. And for me, if you're asking me for an MVP, I'm picking Yaki, because we've seen him catapult with his solo play this team from a pretty okay up-and-coming team to going up against the Shock and even making the Shock have to be like, man, we gotta break out some things that we don't usually break out and pull off some plays that's like a 1 in a million chance that would probably never happen again, some of those plays. But I think that this was also a good close win for the Mayhem, because it kind of shows them that, hey, we do still have some things to work with. And we've seen them have these kind of matches where it's been close, and then they come out the next week, everything's been ironed out, and they just floor teams right after that.
Yeah, so I agree. I completely agree. Is that what you're saying? Early prediction, Yaki for MVP?
I would like to say that, yes, but you do still have to take into account, some guys like Choyobin. Choyobin is tied for first. Like if I were voting on a ballot and you give me 3 picks like you do in the NBA, I'd have a 1A, 1B, and it'd be Choyobin and Yaki or back and forth. Like I would probably have to vote for the both of them at 1.
Okay.
And then probably number 3, I don't like Carpe's. I'm sorry. After this weekend, Carpe's out of the discussion. Yeah. Alarm's out of the discussion for Rookie of the Year for me. Like those 2 guys are just so far and away up there that I don't even know if I could pick a third.
Yeah.
But if I had to pick right now,
Dante,
I could. If I had to wait, if you gave me last weekend, I'm picking Yaki. Like the last weekend, this past weekend, but the week before that was Choyobin. Yeah. It's going to come down to those 2 guys, in my opinion.
Okay.
But we've seen guys get voted for that don't deserve MVP before.
I agree. So, on to a little bit surprising match, especially given what happened last week, was Dallas against the Defiant. I was a little surprised. I'm glad that Dallas came out with the fire behind them that they really needed, because last week was kind of a wake-up call as to what's been going on. So going against another maybe on the same level team as them, I was happy to see them overcome and end up with a 3-0. A little bit surprised that it was a 3-0. I think Toronto has been playing a little bit better than they did here. But what do you think that the Fuel did differently this week that kind of helped them edge out the Defiant?
I think the biggest thing, and it was kind of in a conversation that it was in the interview post game with Onigata and Zoe, where she asked, like, after last week, you guys were under all the scrutiny and, caught a lot of flack for how you guys were, rolling out not only your lineup, but your hero comp. Like, what was the biggest key for you guys to be able to come out this week and, bounce back from that? And he said consistency was the big thing. The fact that we played the same exact thing and we kept practicing that same meta comp for this match helped us immensely. My problem is, while that's all well and good, and congrats to the Dallas Fuel for getting a sweep, and Oni God looked much better than what he did the week before. This team, to me, will not get into the playoffs if they have Paintbrush and Oni God starting in the DPS role, the flanking DPS role, or whatever you want to call it, because Doha is like a Swiss Army knife. You can let that man do anything. But if they run with Oni God and they run with Paintbrush instead of Closer and Decay, or if they don't go out and pick up another better support, I'm still kind of frustrated they didn't go and try and get somebody like a Twilight when he was a free agent, or make efforts to get Ryu Jahong. I mean, I know he's got his own things going on, but when you look at that's their weakest part. They don't need to tinker with the DPS. Decay and Doha have never been a problem for this team.
Right, I agree.
Their problem has been their support keeping Gamsu up. You went out and you paid this man a lot of money. Let's not forget how much Gamsu's getting paid. It's a lot. It's a lot of money. And that man can't even make the impact for your team the way he made an impact for the Dragons, fresh off a trade from the Boston Uprising. The first match he's in, Shanghai wins their first match after 43 losses. The rest is history. I talk about it all the time. But your support, if you're the Dallas Fuel, cannot keep Gamsu up. Gamsu still died a lot. Even though they played better, Gamsu still died a lot because he wasn't getting healed that much. Paintbrush was not putting out that much healing, and he was the main support. Yeah. He was running main. So when your main support is getting outdone by your flex and your tank, your main tank is dying that much, you're not gonna you'll win against teams like the Defiant who are still struggling with a comp and an identity and consistent play, but you won't stand a chance. Like you were up there with the Shock with your previous lineup when you had Closer, Decay, Doha, Gamsu, Note. When you had those guys in there, you pushed the Shock to their limit, and it came down to, again, just one play was the difference between a 3-1 win and a 3-2 loss. One play was all it took. And now you abandon it for whatever reason. You get embarrassed last week by the Titans, who actually we're going to get to look a lot better. Surprised you haven't jumped back on ship, to be honest.
Nope.
And,
nope. I'm not quite. The management's still there.
And you go in this week against the Toronto team again that's just been struggling with an identity and consistency all year. I don't care if you 3-0 them. Your lineup's not going to go against the top dogs.
Yeah.
Not unless Paintbrush has just been this mysterious diamond in the rough who's going to be, the all-encompassing savior and be up there with the Moths of the world or the
not gonna happen.
Any of those main supports. There's too many to list, and I've gone on long enough. But yeah, there's congrats to them, but I don't take much away from it, to be honest.
I think the only thing I disagree with of what you said is that they were close to the Shock as far as their lineup. I think that's a little overzealous, but I completely understand what you were saying. I would like to create a new podcast drinking game for you listening. Every time Nick talks crap about Paintbrush, I want you guys to donate $1 to your charity of choice.
I've only had 2 weeks to talk about Paintbrush, for the record.
Well, we've donated $100. So...
Wait, what am I drinking? Are they drinking or am I drinking?
No, I said every time you talk crap about Paintbrush, we have to. The viewers donate $1 to a charity of their choice.
Oh, because you said drinking game, I thought, and then went back to donate game.
We'll take a drink. They'll donate. It's all good.
I mean,
it's all love.
Unfortunately, I'm out of this, so can't drink anything now.
And then speaking of Vancouver, who I agree embarrassed them last week and ended their horrific start to their season. Ended up 3-0ing Boston, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. I do think these are the two worst teams. But with Boston having played a little bit better, they seem to be, finding a little bit more chemistry. Fusions isn't dying as often. He's still being able to play a little bit aggressive and get away with it. I was very surprised this was a 3-0. And I think Shredlock is the reason why. I think he has been playing so much better. I'm not saying he's the best one on the team. I'm saying his improvement from starting to now is palpable. You can feel it, you can watch it, you can see everything seems to be working. He seems to be understanding a little bit more of how it's played in the Overwatch League as opposed to contenders, because there is quite a bit of a difference in how, play styles and things like that. Just even on that one jump up. I think he's a large part of the reason why, and his flexibility to play different heroes is also, has come a long way. So little surprised that Boston lost in such devastating fashion with a 3-0, but I'm very excited to see the Titans playing a lot better and to see the improvement that's been made between the players.
Yeah, now I have to ask something, because something there at the end kind of gave away what I was suspecting. Do you mean Shockwave, not Shredlock?
Shockwave, I'm sorry.
Because Shredlock is the main tank.
Main tank, yep.
Shockwave is the DPS.
I meant Shockwave.
If you're talking about Shockwave, I 100% agree.
Yep, sorry.
And
sorry.
And I rewatched this one just because the one thing that we can get hung up on sometimes with some of these teams that have lower tier players, for lack of a better way to put it.
I know.
Um,
Someone has to be lower tier.
yeah, but the one thing we get hung
Look at
up on
us.
sometimes is we will look at like we'll praise these guys for their one hero and the fact that they can do others
Yeah.
pretty good. And we don't talk about those other heroes because they're still good enough for their team to win.
Yeah.
What we're seeing with Shockwave is he played at least 7 different heroes
Yeah.
across 3 maps. And honestly, this match was not all that close. It
It
was
was not.
it was like I know that there's the 2-1 and it was I think 4-3 in the next two.
4-3.
Yeah, that's close. But when you look at the way that Vancouver won their points versus the way Boston did, Boston had to
Yeah.
go into overtime and deep into their overtime to get their points, whereas the Titans were ending everything with at least 30 seconds to a minute in their time bank, giving themselves a huge advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the kind of stats you don't see. And when he's playing, we saw him on Hanzo, we saw him on May, Echo, Torbjorn, McCree. I think we even saw him on Soldier again this week. He's playing 4 to 6 or 7 heroes a match, and they're not losing any stride. They're continuing to keep their foot down on the throttle. Their spacing's tight. They're really making sure that their supports are kept up and they're not getting flanked in blindside. And, Shredlock and KSA, they may not be the most flashy as far as getting damage in a limbs, but they are doing a lot of damage block and they're setting up their DPS for success. And when you got a guy like Shockwave, who, if we really want to kind of quantify it, is being to the Titans what Sureforce should be being to the Defiant.
Should be.
A deep hero pool making a difference in every match and constantly evolving your meta to where you're going to have so many options going later into the season.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of optimistic about where the Titans could be heading.
Yeah.
I was about as optimistic as I was about the Boston Uprising, but I
wanted
just
them to
think
do something.
I think it was just a flash in the pan. They just need to trade Fusions away and rebuild.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, Fusions is obviously the marquee name on their team right now. I don't see him getting rid of him. They could build around him. He is a good, solid focal point of the team if he has some support. He's not going to be able to carry the team. But I want to tell you all the DPS heroes that was played by Shockwave just against the Uprising. Okay? Tracer, Ashe, Echo, Widowmaker, Soldier, May, Doomfist, Hanzo, McCree, Sombra, Torb, and Symmetra. One match. That's what the man played. And the only one that he didn't really do much with was Symmetra, and I say that because he did it. He played it for 10 seconds just to put his put that out there. So really, there's still what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 different DPS that he at least did damage with. So 11 different DPS during this match. Now most of his limbs came from playing Echo. That was 34. But he also got 6 limbs as Tracer, 12 as Widowmaker, 5 as Soldier, 6 as May, 6 as Hanzo, 5 as Sombra. So, I mean, it's not easy to get limbs with that many heroes. I know very, very few teams that could switch that often and still acquire that many eliminations per hero. 11 times. That's pretty intense. So I apologize for saying Shredlock. I meant to say Shockwave. That's who I was.
You're about to talk about it's about to make it
referring
sound
to.
like that main tank was going through every tank under the
No,
sun. Like,
sorry.
watch this.
Yeah.
You didn't think a Roadhog was going to work? Guess what?
Just tank roulette. Just
right.
Just go
Spin it. Blindfold.
Yeah.
Oh, Cesaria.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like our other one's a Roadhog, but that's fine. But yeah, I was pretty happy with that. Very sad for Boston.
Now, how happy were you about the next match, the Gladiators and the Justice?
I'm a little bit sad that the Gladiators allowed the Justice to take a map. as a team that is very much fighting to be one of the, high tier teams in the league and the Gladiators, and at times they have shown that they can be with their tank play. I I I think that the Justice are bottom tier right now, even with the additions that they've had for several weeks now with Stitch, and I'm a little bit surprised. I think that they could have just ran him over. It weirds me out a little bit that they decided not to, or I shouldn't even say decided, that they allowed them to steal a map from them. This should have been an easy 3-0 for them, and I think they lost focus a little bit just because of who they were playing. I still think they played very well.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to agree, and it was nice to see, the Gladiators actually be able to do something with a lineup that had, what was it? Was it? I just call him Cloudy. What is it? Uncloudy?
McCloudy.
McCloudy.
I said Cloudy also.
LH Cloudy. So that's
LH
why I just
Cloudy.
call him Cloudy, because that Cloudy. I don't freaking know. Anyway,
I think it's his initials.
Yeah, it was nice to see them actually look formidable with him and Kevster.
Yeah.
Instead of excuse me.
Yes.
Instead of their typical starting DPS. So we saw 2 subs outside of their standard lineup. It was nice to see him have success like that, but I feel like they probably would have easily 3-0'd if they had OG in there.
Yeah.
Because I think with any one of their DPS combinations, they can the Gladiators can outplay the other DPS on the opposing team. And we kind of saw it when it was on Volskaya Industries, and we saw OG come in with a Winston, which we don't really see him play a ton of Winston. He's usually known for his Reinhardt, the amount of damage that he puts out and the space that he creates, making Space's job a whole lot easier on the off tank role. But seeing him on the Winston, it was a draw map. But seeing how much their team fights looked a lot better as far as positioning.
I agree.
The problem was you ran Echo Sombra against Genji Tracer.
Yeah.
You have the aerial advantage with the Echo, and you have the invisibility of Sombra, who can negate any hero on the field with her hacking. When you have that much speed in your DPS line, or going against your DPS line, I should say, you're going to have a long day, no matter who you got in there. So I thought they looked better as a team with OG in there.
Always.
The hero selections, I think, was the only reason that map ended up being a draw.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just happy to see the Gladiators get back to being the more dominant than what we've seen in the past couple of weeks.
Yeah,
basically as dominant as we'd seen them be before the May Melee. So hopefully this is a good indicator of where they'll be returning to form. But I'm not sure about the Kevster and a DPS long term. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and I just think that the map that they lost being a 0, I think is pretty huge. Even if you're experimenting around and you're moving some players and things, you get a 0. You don't take a single point on Rialto. That just seems weird to me. And it didn't seem like they were really throwing out their best. They were losing team fights. I mean, like it just wasn't even close. And they kind of made it easy on the Justice, who just had to kind of carry the card a very short distance. So I do think that if they, shore up a little bit of that moving forward, they're still going to be that team that we think that they are.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of the team that we thought that they were, I really thought the Spark were going to put up more of a fight against Shanghai. I know that they had already just gotten 3-0'd by a much lesser team, and that Shanghai is Shanghai, but I was really expecting a lot more from the Spark, especially coming off of that 3-0. I mean, this wasn't close. I mean, it was a 2-0, it was a 4-3, a 3-1. I mean, it just wasn't, other than them getting 3 points on Volskaya, and even then, it wasn't a speed run. I mean, they still needed all their time bank. They still needed to fight through, and they just so happened to get a couple picks. But what's going on with Spark?
Honestly, I don't really think there's a ton going on with the Spark.
You think Shanghai's just that much better?
I think Shanghai's just that much better because if you want to point to anything, the one thing I will say is running Adora instead of Godsby, is a little bit of a question mark for me.
Yeah.
And we saw the difference that it made when they put Godsby in on Volskaya. The Volskaya match to me showed that the Spark can be one of those teams vying for that semifinal spot. And who knows, maybe pulling off an upset or something and ending up in the finals, depending on how the rest of the season pans out. I I think that when you have your best, if you're the Spark and you have your best lineup and you have a map that shows that type of competitive play and that you can hang that close, force time banks that deep, even if it's later on and you've exhausted yours, if you can force it to be that close, that's promising going forward. But when you make that one adjustment and you start just getting rolled, like the first map, Rialto, was it? No, it was
No,
Oasis.
second map was
Oasis
Rialto.
was the first. Second map was no. Second map was Volskaya.
Third map, I'm sorry, was
Yeah. But if you look at the maps around Volskaya, it wasn't even close. The Shanghai Dragons are just, and again, they have the depth that it doesn't matter what lineup they have. They would probably do that if they had Deding and Diem in there
Yeah.
instead of Fleta and Lip. If they put in Gaguri instead of Void. If they put in, what's the
talking about Fearless.
Izayaki, Li Zhihong, Li Jaegong, and
I can never say any of their supports names.
they've no Gundam Jim's Florida. I can never remember the third one, but Luffy. Any one of those three in there as well on the support line is just as like all three of them can play a really good Zen.
Yeah.
Like just look at that one hero alone. So I think this was just showing that, hey, you saw us experimenting last week. We're still dominant, but this is our best, and our best is just far and away better than anything that you got.
Yeah.
And it was one of those matches where it just seemed like it wasn't fair to the Spark that they had to play the Shanghai Dragons,
right after
or at least they didn't get to play against the Shanghai Dragons at full strength. Why you put Godsby on the bench to start the match? I don't know. I think that makes a huge difference too. But as I say that, with what we've seen from Shanghai, week in, week out, and when they turn it on, they're scary. They're scarier than any team in the league, in my opinion. I just feel bad for the Spark is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, especially coming off of the loss to London that they had to immediately then play Shanghai. You're kind of already, feeling it from that initial game, and then to come out and know that you're gonna have to not make. I mean, you can't make mistakes against Shanghai.
No.
And I agree. I think it's weird that Godsby wasn't playing, and maybe they thought they liked the counters better. I don't think it matters. At some point, the meta no longer matters. You need to play whoever is going to play the best, especially if you're playing a team like Shanghai, because if you're putting out these heroes and you're making mistakes, but they counter, with air quotes, it's not going to matter. They're going to expose. Sometimes you don't even have to make mistakes. They just play better, and I completely agree that they're definitely far and away better. I still would have liked to have seen a little bit more fight from the Spark, especially losing both on Oasis right to start. And I know that probably had something to do with Godsby not being in. I agree that 3-4 map on Valskaya can definitely, be something they can hold on to and rewatch and say what went right here, because they were contending and looking like they could contend potentially with one of the better teams. I still think Shanghai looked like they were in control for much of the map, but the Spark kind of showed some flash. I'm interested in what they're going to be able to do. Yeah. Well, I try to avoid saying that. The next one was not surprising to me. The Dynasty have been playing, like I said, less volatile than they were before. And now that they've kind of found their groove, it's unfortunate that the Hunters, again, have had to play an upper-level team. And they were kind of punished for it. I mean, that's really all I had on that. It didn't seem like they played bad or they played poorly or they didn't know what they were doing. They were just kind of outclassed, I think.
No, it was and the Hunters, you could tell the wind was out of their sails. I think the Hunters have historically this season played the Charge much closer than they had this past weekend. So I think being 3-1 by the Charge kind of took the wind out of their sails. And the Dynasty, again, they're a very good team and they've gotten better. less volatile, and we just saw them come out and be like, all right, we're not, we may have lost, but we're not taking the second day off. We're gonna put the gas to the floor. But
Yeah, I mean it was an
but
0-2, 1-2, 0-3. I mean
yeah,
they took one at 1 point. So that's rough, unfortunately.
yeah. Now what's
But
rough really is my brain trying to comprehend what happened in the NYXL charge match. Like, I still don't understand how NYX. I mean, this was a match that genuinely either team could have won.
I agree.
Genuinely. I don't know how NYXL did not win this because they looked like they even put Haxel in on support. We saw a flashback to his role in the GOATS meta
Yeah,
with the Titans. We saw him play Brigitte, and they
Bergie.
just looked like even like the casters were going, this is about to be a 3-0 roll, and it's not about to be close. And we just saw the charge on Anubis get the slightest perfectly timed of picks, like the most minuscule millisecond of getting that pick to end up making it more competitive. And this was a true back and forth match. Like
Yeah,
it
it
was
really was.
NYXL
Literally.
dominant, charge sneaking it out. NYXL rather dominant. Then the charge rather dominant. And then that last map was just who the heck was going to win? We didn't it was down to the wire the whole way. And the more I watched it, it was one of those, if I'm a charge fan, I'm sweating bullets. Like, oh my gosh, I don't know how we almost lost that. Like freaking out about near losing. Whereas if I'm the NYXL, I'm looking, going, that was actually a pretty good loss. But man, why didn't we win? Like, if you're, I'd rather be the charge in this situation as far as
For sure, they got
emotionally.
the dub.
They got because they got the dub, but because they have a less like awkward state of mind going forward. The
Sure.
NYXL again, when they experiment, we see this happen. They'll experiment with the roster or the hero lineup, and then the next week they come out and they roll. It's happened so far. Hopefully that's what happens going into the tournament, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But when
Yeah.
if you're NYXL looking at, you watched your spacing, there was like a lot of times when these kind of losses happen for NYXL, it's usually because the DPS extended too far out of reach of their support,
Quite a bit.
Mono was too aggressive, or Jonak was too conservative and worried about healing, so he gets picked too easy. I call it the Raucus mentality. When Raucus is over healing and not putting out damage, he gets
Yeah.
picked a lot.
Yeah.
Not his fault. He's trying to do his job. But when Jonak gets in that same state of mind, the team's going to go, he's not attacking. He's not being aggressive. Let's take the aggression to him because he's not ready for it. And then we see, the 1-by-1 picks usually. That wasn't the case this weekend. Like the oddball picks were what were happening.
Mm-hmm.
Hotba was getting picked. Nene was the one getting picked instead of Libero. And Libero was the more aggressive hero on the DPS side the entire match. He was running the Genjis and the Doomfists and the heavy flankers. And now we saw Nene on Tracer a little bit, but it was more often than not the flanker was going to be Libero. And Hoxel and Jonak as a support duo,
Holy damage.
That's scary. I take back what I said about like who I would take as far as duos a few weeks ago.
Oh yeah.
Give me those two. As much as I love seeing Haxel on his Doomfist and on his Genji and those things, that's just filthy.
Yeah.
But because of how filthy that was and how good their team play was, and you still somehow lost, would leave me a little confused if I'm the NYXL. I'm not as worried about them going forward despite the loss as I was after last weekend's loss. Or the weekend before's loss. But if I'm the charge, I'm feeling pretty good. But I think this is going to be a matchup to watch going forward, because I think this is the most pivotal of the matchups of who's going to be challenging Shanghai for the Asian region.
This is definitely a preview of what could come later on in the season. I completely agree. The Charge were my early pick to win the whole thing. I think I said it back in like week 13. They were my early pick to win the whole thing. I think that this is one of those matches that just kind of justifies that pick. it was not looking good. I mean, the first map was pretty handedly NYXL. It
And the first point of the second map.
yeah, even still. And the way that the Charge were able to kind of rally back and really fight against a good team in the NYXL and end up pulling out a win, especially with two map wins right in a row on Blizzard World and then on Lijiang, where they blanked NYXL 2 maps in a row. A goose egg from them. I mean, that's a huge play against a good team. So I'm very happy with how they've still been playing. I don't know exactly who, normally you can kind of say the supports won in this match. The DPS were getting the picks or what, but it really seemed like a big team effort, more so than they normally even play to get this win. I think that's a good one. They need to sweat these out a little bit, especially for the tournaments coming on, and that's a quality win and unfortunately a quality loss for NYXL. But at this point in the season, if you're vying for those final top spots and all that, you've gotta beat teams like this, and it's unfortunate that they ended up, dropping those to the Charge. I don't think it was anything against them. I think the Charge just played a better team game than they did, and that's why they pulled out the win.
And I will say the one silver lining you could take away as far as losing, NYXL is still in the 3rd seed spot for the Asian region.
Yeah.
Which is it's solid. It's very good. Especially if you look at the flip side and the 3rd seed, if we're talking at the end of the season, guys.
Sure.
End of the season right now, if you look at the top 3 on either region, Shanghai, Charge, NYXL. Compared to Shock, Fusion, Mayhem. That's a pretty good, positioning in my opinion.
That's a solid top 6.
So even though you lost, and that match is the only reason that it's not Shanghai NYXL Charge.
Sure.
So that's where it becomes a bit of a problem. Is like that loss dropped you from 2 to 3,
and you're losing those head-to-heads.
But at least it was a drop from 2 to 3 in a head-to-head, rather than this head-to-head is going to be you being 2nd or 6th.
Right.
That's when it becomes problematic. So there's a lot more positives to take away from this loss than negatives, which is usually not the case with a loss.
I agree.
Now, that was my confusing match. How about we talk about your confusing match? Because
Super
this
confused.
is like your number 2 team going against a team that you've been sleeping on all season long.
Yeah, and I did mention last week that they were playing definitely a lot better, and I was very confused as to what the Valiant were trying to do. It didn't feel. I know the maps were a 1-2, a 1-2, 3-2, 1-3, but it didn't feel all that close. They weren't really getting picks early on. I think that they've definitely lost the tank battle, in the middle there. I just think the Eternal played better. I mean, the Valiant were making some mistakes, but I don't think it was necessarily more than they're used to. They definitely have their holes in the armor and all that can be exploited, but Paris saw every opportunity that they made a mistake, and Paris jumped on it every single time. A DPS was out of position, they didn't make it back to the group. A tank was out of position, they didn't make it back to the group. If one of their DPS was out of position, they would move up and save that person and get a pick along the way. They were doing a lot better, and I definitely have to say hats off to the Eternal for proving me wrong. I definitely didn't think that they would even... I think I said this would be a 3-0 in the Valiant's favor, I believe.
You did.
So hats off to them for proving me wrong. I'm very happy to see them playing a lot better, and to try to keep pace with some of these other teams that are improving, like the Outlaws and even the Valiant and the Gladiators, and they're really trying to get those last few seats. This is a great quality win for them.
Mm-hmm.
Completely
very
agree.
quality win. Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah, and that's honestly all the more I really had to say about it, because Paris just came out and now there is one thing I did want to talk about this match, because I know several weeks ago I said, okay, Overwatch League officials, can we make it illegal against the rules to give Paris Junkertown in any one of their matchups
Right.
because they have figured it out? The LA Valiant are the first team to beat Paris on Junkertown this season.
And it was still close.
So give them some, and it was still close, yeah. But we
Still
got to
pretty
give
safe.
credit to the Valiant. So
Yeah.
even though the Paris looked far and away better, even in that map, because again, Paris just they know all the ins and outs of how to make that map,
They
you
really
know,
do.
work in their favor. The Valiant pulled out the win on that map, which is huge. And another bright spot for the Valiant is, KSP just continues to far exceed every other DPS. He did get lapsed in final blows by 7 by Carpe this past weekend,
Mm-hmm.
which confuses me, but I guess it's not so much about Carpe getting more final blows because he obviously didn't. I think it was more KSP just got fewer final blows, whereas he got more
Yeah.
solo kills and wins.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, in the limbs,
In the limbs.
because he's
They did not
still
get a win.
no, not win, and more hero damage because he's still way ahead of everybody else.
Yeah.
And yeah, KSP Rookie of the Year, but
The next one was not surprising, although I was a little bit surprised that Vancouver didn't play at least a little bit better, given how they had played before. It wasn't really close. 1-2, 1-2, 0-3. They weren't really putting up too much of a fight, I don't think. Even though they were taking those 1 points, they still all went to 99. They were still, they're not going to be able to win those close fights. Reign have been playing a lot better as of the last couple weeks, and this resulted in a 3-0, which I think we both had said it was going to end up being a 3-0. It was semi-fun to watch, just the Reign didn't really seem to mess around a whole lot. They were just like, you know what, we're playing a lesser opponent. We're just gonna
well,
try to win.
one of the Reign was messing around.
Well, one of the Reign always messes around.
I gotta say, like if you don't tune into a Reign match for anything else, tune in just to watch Baby Bay in the chat.
Yeah.
It's all the entertainment value you need.
Or Dogman Tactical Crouch.
And in this case, that's the one unspoken thing, the one highlight that I'll bring out of this before we wrap it up with our last two matches.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a huge part of the reason that the Titans didn't play very well is Baby Bay, with that trash talk, with that messing around. I think he got in their heads.
Good.
Because they were playing pretty decent, holding out on team fights. They were, spacing was solid. They were doing a pretty good job against the Atlanta Reign.
Yeah.
And against a better team. But the moment Baby Bay started talking, all the wind just went out the sails for the Titans, and they looked like a team that's not been improving. They looked like the team that was like thrown together last minute.
Yep.
So it was a very much psychological warfare win for the Atlanta Reign.
Sometimes that's what it takes.
Now,
I know that you don't like skipping over matches. I'd like to end with the Fusion Shock. If we could just go ahead and quickly talk about the
fine
Justice
in this
in
case.
Boston.
I can make an exception for that because I almost suggested the same. Okay. I was almost going to suggest the same with the NYXL charge, but man.
This was actually a fairly close match. I mean, all of the maps were within 1 point, and I think that they were all just within grasp of the Uprising. I do think that Justice has a better overall team. I still don't think that they're quite where they want to be or need to be, especially with the talent that I feel like they have. I don't feel like they're playing up to their talent level. I think Boston played exactly up to their talent level. They got close. They couldn't win, those key team fights when the match is on the line. You get a couple picks, they get a couple picks, and they fall apart because they can't really win those a whole lot, especially if Fusion gets picked early, which he does early and often get picked. So hats off to the Justice for being able to pull out this poop bowl of the week.
Yeah, but and I don't think they'd be having to. I don't think they would find themselves in the poop bowl discussion if they'd make one simple change. It's just one. They need to find a better DPS than Tuba, because we know how good Roar was in LA.
Yep.
We obviously know the history of Stitch and Janu from the Titans. One history, we kind of know that Aim God is mid-tier flex support, so he's pretty good. One thing history-wise that people forget a lot about is Arc. And to that point, do you know who Arc used to play for?
I don't.
You don't? Mm-mm. Arc was an NYXL member. He was the main support that played alongside Jonak in season 1.
Okay.
That dominant team that has basically set the standard of why NYXL is held up here by everybody, every caster, every analyst, everyone holds NYXL up here. And when they falter, he was a part of that team that set that standard, that had Pine in his heyday, that had this depth that was just unheard of. He's a very good main support. His skill level has not changed. We've seen him continuously be a very, very, very good main support. It's just he's been on a Washington Justice team that is at its whole always been
Yeah.
like that's the best way to describe it. Now they're finally pulling together. They pulled in Name God from the offseason. You added a mid-tier flex player, pretty good. Does a very good job of balance. You huge acquisition of Jonu, one of the best off tanks in the league. You got a very, very, I'd say probably top 15 DPS, top 10 to 5 to 10 in flank hero DPS in Stitch.
Yeah.
And you signed Roar in the offseason as well before the season started from the Gladiators, who was OG before OG.
Go-to, yeah.
He was OG before OG went from Fuel to the Gladiators. So you look at those 5 and you still see them not quite looking like the team that they should based on their roster and not based on their coaching staff, because they have coaching staff now with ties to the Vancouver Titans. The only thing you can point to is Tuba. And when you look at the stats, he is a weak link. He's not getting very many final blows. He's not getting out that much damage. And he's definitely not getting any solo kills. That's where Stitch is coming in and doing the work. So if you have a DPS who's not even pulling his weight in those 3 categories, he's getting out damaged by his tanks, out of limb by his counterpart, I think even Aim God has more final blows than Tuba. I think therein lies the problem. And then we probably see something different than what we're seeing from the Justice, because the history speaks for itself about what these individual players are capable of, and the coaching staff does as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. I don't think that they're playing up to the potential that they should be, especially with those pickups over the off season, and within the first 10 weeks. I think it was week 14 or week 12 that they picked up those 2 guys. So a little disappointing with how they've been playing overall, but I'm glad that they did end up getting the win here and maybe getting a little bit of wind in their sails to move forward. Unfortunately, I don't think Boston is going to be able to climb out of the hole that they've created for themselves, so I don't think it matters. No. So moving on to the what we thought was going to be the marquee game. I mean, the interesting game was the Mayhem versus the Outlaws, but this one was supposed to be what that one was. This one was supposed to be Battle of the Titans, the greatest gladiator show and it was not even, it might as well have been Vancouver.
It might as well have been. What's funny is, for those of you who have been listening to this from the beginning, watching this from the beginning, whatever the case is, you know that I have been very, very heavily doubting and critical of the Fusion. Mm-hmm. I've given them credit when it's due. I've been like, they shored up these problems. They've done this, they've done that. And I've been very judicial and not as harsh. I take all of that back. This team is flat out overrated. I don't care if you got a 15-2 record. You just got stomped. It's like you went in to a fight with a metal bat. You had armor plating. You had everything at your disposal to be in this fight. And this guy just came in with bare fists and embarrassed you. That's what the equivalent is. You had bare fist whooped you despite having all the arsenal that you needed. Because how often have when I say that, the arsenal I'm referring to is you've got Carpe, you got Hisu, you've got EQO, which, where the heck has he been, by the way?
I know.
Boombox, Alarm, you've got, and you got Funny Astro, you've got Sato, Fury, Poco. You're supposed to be up there as one of the teams with the deepest lineup, in contention with teams that are deep, like the San Francisco Shock, the Shanghai Dragons, the now Hangzhou Spark, who are pretty deep. And let's not forget about NYXL, who is so deep that they can put a DPS player on support. You're supposed to have depth that rivals that, and you can't even take a map. I barely even remember if they took a point, for crying out loud.
It was 2-0, 2-1, 3-2, but it never felt like they were in the driver's seat. It never did. And that 3-2 to end on Rialto would have been much worse had the shot gotten to go first.
Yes, it would have. Like you set the standard, you couldn't even full cap,
Nope.
and then the shock just roll right through you.
Yeah.
So yes, this was your opportunity to assert that, hey, we are for real, we are legit. All you people who have been doubting and critical of our play style of needing that early pick, of not of being very, very protective of one specific hero, all these play styles that we've criticized. This was your opportunity to come out and say, doesn't matter what our play style is, doesn't matter who we have in our lineup. We are that good. Stop doubting us.
Right.
And instead, you got curb stomped.
Yep.
So I don't want to hear any more about the Fusion being, a finals contender or being a top tier team, because clearly the shock just showed that you're not. There are teams that have a worse record than you that hung better with the shock. Teams like the Dallas Fuel, teams that beat you like the Paris Eternal, hung better with the shock, and they beat you still too, and hung better. Like, I could go on and on with all I need to kind of point this thing out. I don't even need to get into the individual plays of guys like Choyobin or of Rascal or Striker, who, oh my gosh,
Has come back with a vengeance.
forgot about how good of a tracer this man was.
We've seen him so much on like Reaper, but you haven't really.
And we've seen him on so much McCree and
Yeah.
so much Ash. He's been the hit scan, and they took a step back for him and put Ons in instead.
Yes.
So we haven't even seen him play that much of the hit scan. We've seen him play a lot of the May and stuff. Then they're like, let's put in Rascal to play May. The guy with the highest IQ in the freaking league who can like learn a character in 5 seconds. My gosh. Like, he came out and was just outplaying. Like, I'm sorry. I alluded earlier to the fact that Carpe somehow passed KSP back up in solo kills. I believe it was. Yeah, it was solo kills.
Yeah.
I don't know how. I really don't, because Carpe,
Nowhere to be found.
Nowhere to be found. Like, yeah, he was even playing heroes he's good with, because we saw, Tracer. We saw his Tracer be the reason that they upset the NYXL in the semifinals back in season 1, and he was the Tracer we saw matching up against Prophet, and we know the Tracer god that Prophet is. He's supposed to be that good.
Yeah.
His Hanzo, his Widow, those are his bread and butter. Those sniping hit scans. He's supposed to be the best in the league at it. All those heroes he played, he got embarrassed by an Ashe and a counter Tracer and Striker and a May. He had three different matchups that he had an opportunity to say, I'm the MVP, I'm the real deal. Y'all are sleeping on my team and me. I'm going to put my foot down and assert that I'm the best DPS. No.
Didn't do it.
Not even close. I would say he's not even top 10
well,
DPS.
I don't think so either. And I would agree with about half of what you're saying. I'm not quite so far off the deep end against them that I think that this proves that they're not a top tier team. I just think that the Shock are that much better than them. I don't think that they are the second best team in the league like a lot of people do. I still think that there are probably, 2 or 3 teams that are still better. But it is still hard to argue with their record. And some of these matches that they're winning are pretty handedly. So I agree that this was their moment to say, we're here. We're in this. We are not to be trifled with. We're going to go against the Shock. We're going to go against, I would say 1B as far as best teams in the league, with 1A being Shanghai. We're going to go up against them, and we're going to prove that we are in that conversation. And they just couldn't hang. And it didn't matter who they put in, what meta they were running. It just didn't matter. It seems close. 1, 2, and 2, 3. It just wasn't close.
It wasn't. And I forgot one other thing too. Completely slipped my mind. I meant to make this point too. Remember how I mentioned Haxel?
Yeah.
The Shock put Rascal in at support as well. On Rialto. And you still got whooped.
Yeah. It wasn't close.
Like, it was a bevy of opportunities to be like, we're the real deal. And no,
So I think that's their third loss now,
that's
correct?
now their second
Or second
loss.
loss. Okay.
Yes. Yes. They now have the same. I said San Francisco would
Well,
be the number one seed.
yeah.
They would be in the tiebreaker because they've beat the Fusion now. Fusion are still holding that number one spot in the American region just because of
They have
map
a half
differential.
win. Yeah.
They have a
Well,
half a
they have a
map over
half
them or
win
something like
because
that.
we're using baseball terms here for those of you that don't know how the
Yep.
point system works in baseball. They have one more win than Shanghai or than the
Hmm.
Shock do, but they have the same losses, so that's a half game up on
Right.
them currently. Um,
But if it comes down to tie breaks right now, the Shock, I believe, both own both map differential and the tie break
the
because of this
Shock do
match.
not own the
Oh,
map
is it
differential.
still the map differential?
It's still 27 to 24. But just
Okay.
to talk about how good the Shanghai Dragons are, they have 18 wins, three more than the Fusion, and 35 map differential plus 35 map differential right now.
Yeah.
Um,
Against, in my opinion, against better competition too.
they definitely played against much
The Fusion have gotten a lot
much
of
difficult,
Titans and a
more
lot of
difficult teams.
Uprising and a
Yeah,
lot of Justice.
but so did
Whereas
Florida.
The Shock have been getting, Mayhem, Paris. They've been getting Dallas teams that had a good lineup. Like the Shock have been getting good competition.
I agree.
Whereas the Fusion have been. Oh, and let's not forget the Valiant and Gladiators still do pretty well, and at least get a
Yeah,
map, maybe two against the Shock,
yeah,
and
and
are
they're
the two
battling.
teams that
They're
have beat
trying.
them. They are the two teams that have beat them too.
Yeah. So, speaking of all the map differential and all of that, so let's go into our top five power rankings. Um, I think we've been doing weekly. I want to do overall right now. You have to seed the tournament. Who's your number one through number five? And not don't separate the conferences. I mean overall, who's your one through five?
Right, and that's what I was going. That's how I've been approaching it.
Me
Like
too.
you've been doing week to week. I've honestly been doing
You've been doing
like
overall.
I've been doing overall
Yeah.
based on the week coming in.
Yeah.
I would have to say that my top five. I can't pick number one because until we get to see the Dragons and the Shock play each other, we can't really. We probably won't get to see that till the end of the year, which is disappointing.
You have to pick
I
one.
can't. If I had to pick, my gut check is going to tell me take the Dragons. So for me, it would be the Dragons, the Shock. Then I'd probably have to say,
You know who it is.
well, this is the thing. I want to go based. If I go based on rank, I would say the Charge.
That's exactly
My
what it is.
my thing is, I look at teams like Hangzhou. I look at teams like the Gladiators, and even teams like more importantly and better, NYXL and the Florida Mayhem. It's hard to pick that three spot, but because the Charge have now beaten NYXL twice, and we haven't seen Florida play like a lot of the American teams, haven't seen them play the Asian teams, I'd have to give the edge to the Charge. Then at four, I'd have to put NYXL. I was gonna say five, but rewatching the match against the Charge, I'm a little more confident that they're a four overall. And then five would be the Mayhem. If I hadn't rewatched the matches, my initial was going to be that it would be four Mayhem, NYXL five. But for me, it's Dragons, then the Shock, then the Charge, then the Excelsior, and then the Mayhem.
I have a very similar top five. I do switch them around a little bit, although I'm actually not going to put the Excelsior in the top five. I think that some of their coaching decisions and things like that have really impacted their play. And they're sitting right now at 5 losses with a plus 21. Now, I know that their map differential has still been pretty good. I mean, it's still up there with the Shocks and all that with a plus 21. But you have a plus 21 and you still have that many losses. I mean, so I'm going to go.
But that also shows how close their losses have been.
They've been close.
They
they've
still
been
haven't
close.
been 3-0'd.
No, they haven't.
So
I think the Shock is the number two. I agree that the Shanghai Dragons will edge them out. as far as how they've played so far. It is so dangerously razor thin close though between those two. We've just been able to watch more matches from Shanghai right now.
Yeah, they
Those
get to play
4
2 days every weekend.
Right. Those 4 extra matches are pretty huge to come out with 4 extra wins over top of the Shock. So I think that's the only other reason. If the teams were both 18-2, I might be more inclined to pick the Shock. Shock going number 2. I am gonna drop, and say that the Charge are the number 3 team. I'm still gonna put the Fusion at number 4. I still think at being 15-2 with a plus 27 map differential, even though they lost.
You drinking something?
Yes, actually.
What's in that? Oh, that's what it is.
So
okay, never mind. I got what I needed.
So even still, with them losing that match, it's still hard to refute the fact that they only have 2 losses, that they still have 15 wins, which is actually still one more than the Shock, that their map differential is still better than the Shock's. Now, strength of schedule aside, they've done what they should against some of these lesser teams. It's not their fault that the schedule hasn't fallen to be much tougher than that. So I'm still going to put them at 4. I think it's hard to argue that, I think you could argue that. And then I'm actually going to... I really, really want to put Florida at 5. I really want to.
Then who in the world are you putting at 5? If you're not putting NYXL and you're not putting Mayhem.
That's what now I'm kind of going back on, because looking at NYXL and looking at the Mayhem, I think that they're fairly close as well. I know that the map differential is very much heavily favored in the NYXL side with 11 more map wins. But the flashy way that the Mayhem have been playing, I just really enjoy. I think I'll go ahead. I'll leave NYXL at number 5 right now. But another loss, even if it's to a team that I think is ranked higher than them, it's going to drop them out. And I know that, we don't know exactly who they're going to be playing next week. And we're not really actually able to make any predictions because there's only 4 matches set up right now. Those are just play-ins. So that's just for seeding. So we probably won't, we can make those predictions, but we won't really be able to say much on it. I'll be very interested to watch how they do next weekend, or this weekend, I guess. And I think that'll really, really determine where they flow. I think they are just barely hanging on by a thread because they've got some, really they have the Eternal, the Mayhem. Man, even really, there's 3 or 4 teams that are they're vying for those top 6 spots. So I'm hoping that they can continue to, or that they can kind of bring it back and start playing as dominantly as we know that they can, because 1 or 2 more losses and this won't even be a conversation. It'll be the Mayhem if they continue to play as they have been. So let's go ahead and give our predictions for the following week. I know where there's only a couple games that we're actually able to say with certainty that are even going to happen. But just go ahead and run down with me here. I think you'll be very interested in this match with the Fuel playing against the Eternal. I'm interested to see who you're going to say.
This is one of the matches I am interested in. Not as much as the second match of the day.
Sure.
But because these are 2 teams that I really like,
yes,
as a lot of people know. And I've been disappointed in Dallas. Paris has not let me down yet. They're pretty much what I thought they are.
Sure.
For that reason, I'm taking Paris 3-1.
Okay.
I think what'll happen is Paris will go up 2-0. Dallas will realize they need to put in the right people. They'll put in the right people. They'll have a flash and get a map, but then Paris will readjust, win their third map. That's what I think will happen.
I actually completely agree. I think the Fuel maybe steal a map here and get a point out of it, but I do think that the Eternal have shown that they're here and they're ready to play and that they're going to beat the Fuel.
Now, what about this matchup that you're really looking forward to? You were ecstatic talking about it earlier.
I was very happy that they were playing a second time in a row. I don't think it's going to be as close this time. I think it's going to be a 3-0, maybe a 3-1. Houston takes the map. I'm going to go with 3-1. I just think with the DPS that the Mayhem have, I doubt that the Houston Outlaws can put out as much damage as they were able to against them this past weekend. I think that the Mayhem are a lot better at adapting, although the Outlaws have been doing quite a bit better here lately. I think the Mayhem are a little bit better at adapting with playstyle, and that they're going to end up kind of taking over the map early on. And I think maybe they drop one, but I would say 3-1 Mayhem.
And I'm leaning the same way, 3-1 Mayhem. The one thing I will say, though, I'd be watching this match for an upset from Houston if Linkser starts alongside Dante.
Yep, he did
As,
not start last one,
because
and they
they
won
started with Blase.
2 maps.
That people forget about how much momentum and consistency is a huge thing in any form of competition.
Yep.
Whether it's a physical sport like basketball or football, whether it's an esport, whether it's a board game, consistency each time you play is key to being successful. And once you have a lineup that doesn't work and then you try to tinker it and you only have so much time, you're not going to do that well. It's not like where you can just rotate in and out in basketball. Everybody's still kind of warm and you put in a new body. Oh, it's just going to change your style of play, but maybe you'll do better. When you're taking out DPS to play the same style and there's just a flash of brilliance for a second, that's an easy fix. Yeah. So I'd be watching for that.
Yeah. The Valiant Toronto, both of these teams, I think, were very...
I don't like this one.
I know. It was a very poor showing from both of these teams over the past weekend. I still think that the Valiant are a better team, and if they play like they have been, I think they have the potential to 3-0. I'm hoping it's a little bit closer, but I'm going to say 3-2 in the Valiant's favor.
I'm actually leaning more. I am leaning more towards the Valiant, but I'm actually saying it's more of a 3-0.
You think so? Okay, I did think it has the potential. I'm hoping that the Defiant play a little bit better than
I would like to see. I'd like to see the Defiant play a lot better. They were of all the teams coming into the season, they were probably the one I was the highest on outside of my own team.
Sure.
Because I felt like they made perfect acquisitions. They built, in my mind, they had a lot of depth. But they've just maybe blame it on coaching. They do not look good enough to be in contention against a Valiant team that, honestly, the Valiant they could be a sleeper for the playoffs, like the actual playoffs. I think that they are, and that's just aside from KSP.
Yeah,
like he's a wild card. Yeah, but I mean, we saw like the Melee, they could have made that run. It's just they ran into the Shock, who were like, "Oh, you've been undefeated since Halsey retreated you, huh? Let me fix it quick."
Yeah.
So I'm saying 3-0 Valiant.
Okay. Gladiators Justice. I don't think they lose a map again, so I'm gonna say 3-0 Gladiators.
Yeah, since this is a rematch, I'd have to say 3-0 Gladiators. I mean, it sucks. We've picked all the same teams through this, but that's the disadvantage of rematch play-ins.
Yeah.
Is, especially a lot of the only ones like we saw, actually 2 of these are just reverses of previous matchups.
Yeah.
The other 2 are identical.
Yep.
And we saw what these teams do against each other. So I don't know. Yeah. The play-ins are going to be boring. After that's when it's going to be exciting, and we can't tell you what we're going to think about it.
I know. Friggin' sucks. So. All right, that was week 21 of the Overwatch League, and a prediction for the following week for 22 in the Summer Showdown tournament, which is starting tomorrow at 3 p.m. So go ahead and cram this in tonight when it gets released, or in the morning. You can follow us on all of our socials, CNowKing13 on Twitch and Twitter, although my tweets are absolutely ridiculous. And then there is Skitch121 also on Twitter and Twitch. We live stream several times a week and play a myriad of different games. Let us know what you think in the comments below. We'll link all the socials down there. You can email us at tacvisorpod@gmail.com. I've had a couple fan questions that I am holding on to because they are for a little bit later down the line. But let me know what you guys think, and share, all the good stuff. And then don't forget to have a good weekend. It's not all about video games, guys. Go see your families.
Yeah, have a happy 4th. Blow some stuff up legally. And just have a good time. Celebrate Independence Day.
All right. Have a good one, guys.
Fireworks, senile. Come on.
I'm done with this.
Jeez. Stop thinking arsenic.